Welcome to the BWI Daily Edition. I'm Thomas Frank Carr. This is Max Chadwick of PFF. He is their college guy. What is your official title, Max? Because I was told you're the college guy, but what's your official title at PFF?
I'm a college football analyst. We've been into it before. I don't know if I'm technically a lead college football analyst. I'm basically doing all the college football content for them right now, but I'm a college football analyst for sure. That I do know.
Okay, well, he is here because college football and the NFL are colliding at the NFL draft. And Max is, of course, the lead or one of the lead college football analysts. And we were talking before the show, also a huge Penn State fan. So this is going to be a great conversation. We're going to have a really good in-depth conversation about these players. I'm excited for this, Max.
I've spoken. I'm supposed to be a neutral guy, but I'm still a huge Penn State fan. I've been on Michigan podcasts. I've been on an Ohio State podcast this morning. This is a nice change of pace where it's like not having to wax poetic about Michigan or Ohio State. And I'm getting to talk some Penn State football. This is kind of a dream come true. And I mentioned to you before, Blue White Illustrated is one of the best there is at covering Penn State football. So I've been following that since I was a kid. To be able to be on this podcast now is truly like a dream come true for me. So this is pretty awesome.
Well, I was planning on starting with you, and thank you for that, by the way. I was planning on starting with you here on the BWI Daily Edition about the draft, but reading your articles over at PFF.com, we got to talk about everything you've been writing because let's start with this one. If all the college players were eligible, that was your latest mock draft. If every college player was available, Penn State had 3 first-round draft picks in your mock draft, one at cornerback, and none of them were Joey Porter Jr. So who are the guys you highlighted, and what makes them special?
That's what makes me so excited for next year. Is that you mentioned 3 first-round picks? All of them are not eligible for this year's draft, which was pretty cool. And I think Joey Porter Jr. would have been one of the top corners. I just couldn't fit him in because I think he's a late first-round pick right now in the real draft. So in this special mock draft, he didn't get in. But, yeah, man, you mentioned it. Kalen King, I love. I think he's the better corner of the two. I think he is, the star of that secondary. His single coverage grade was higher than almost every corner in the country. And, yeah, I was super impressed with him. Chop Robinson is a guy that I am – all in on. He's a guy that I don't think has gotten enough love. I mean,
Preach.
He's been in kind of like a rotational role for Penn State and then kind of came on at the end. But, man, I mean, he led all Power 5 edges in overall grade, pass rushing grade. His pass rush win rate was 4th in the Power 5. So, Kalen King, Chop Robinson. And then, of course, everyone knows a guy that, a lot of people think could be a top 10 pick in next year's draft. Could have been a top 20 pick in this year's draft if you declared Olu Fashanu, the left tackle for Penn State, who I have going late first round in this one just because I think next year's tackle class is pretty special. Penn State fans actually did not like me when I ranked the top 10 offensive tackles, and I put them 4th. But I think that's just a credit to how good the tackles are coming back to college because he is phenomenal. He's just a terrific pass protector. And, Drew Alara is going to have a very good security guard in Olu Fashanu at left tackle next year.
So I can bypass my question of, have you watched Drew Aller? And if so, what were your thoughts? Let me just get your thoughts then on Drew Aller. Let's cut right to the chase. What have you seen of him, and what do you think of him in the limited sample size, given what it is, of the way he performed last season?
Yeah, Drew Aller is terrific. The Josh Allen comps coming out of high school, I think were lofty for sure, and I don't think he's got the mobility that a Josh Allen has. Yeah. But in terms of the size, I mean, the kid is a tank. He's like 6'5", I think, and like 230 already as a true freshman. And then he's got the arm. He made a few, big time throws last year. He had one of the highest big time throw rates in the Power 5. And, I think the sky's the limit for this kid. And again, the last toolsy quarterback that Penn State had was Christian Hackenberg, and we all thought he would be the number 1 overall pick after his freshman year, and that didn't obviously come to fruition. But I think that Drew Aller is a guy that I cannot wait for. I know every Penn State fan was clamoring for that guy at many points last season to start over Sean Clifford. I'm glad Cliff was able to go out in the sunset, literally in the Rose Bowl. But I think that Drew Aller is a guy that you got to be so excited for next year, and I truly am.
There's 1,000 different ways that I want to go with that conversation of like what we've been talking here on the Daily Edition about, like what type of offense do you build around him, what strength do you accentuate, and of course there's always the unknown of what we don't know about him. But putting those aside for a second, given what you just talked about with 3 potential first-round draft picks coming back, how good do you think this team can be next fall, given you've been on Ohio State and Michigan radio recently? So where do they land in the annual game of can you beat those 2 teams?
They're up there. They're definitely up there. And they're a team that I'm very high on. And again, as a Penn State fan, I try not to get too high because I know how good the other 2 are. And I put Penn State number 7 in my way to really top 25. I seen them as high as 5 and even higher, maybe 4. This is a team that could compete for the playoff. They got all the talent in the world to do so. I think it really comes down to Drew Aller. I think it really comes down also to the receivers. And I think Dante Cephas, the Kent State transfer, is a big-time get. Because I was talking to my brother, also a Penn State fan, and we're like, man, losing Parker Washington, losing Mitchell Tinsley, Brenton Strange is gone, although I'm very excited for Theo Johnson. But you look at it and you're like, they need a receiver. And I think Dante Cephas is one of the top receivers in the portal. But still, I think it still is a question mark at pass catcher. So Drew Aller, whether or not he can lift up those pass catchers. Obviously, I think the offense is going to be really predicated on one of the best duos in the country in Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen. But I'm really excited for this team next year. And I don't think they should be the favorite in the Big Ten. I think they're the 3rd best team in the Big Ten. But still, the 3rd best team in the Big Ten is still a top 7 team in college football. So I am super high in Penn State. Will they make the college football playoff? I don't know. I don't think so. But they got the sky's the limit. If Drew Aller's the guy, then they could. They very well could.
All right, we're going to probe some of the deeper parts of your knowledge here then. We're going to take Aller and his development aside. What will it take then for this team to rise to the level of being 1 or 2? Because I think it's pretty clear that if you run a certain schedule in the Big Ten and the East and you play those 2 teams and you split with one of them, your chances of going to the college football playoff are rather high. So what does it take within the team to be on that level of 2 or maybe even 1? Although I think I agree with you, that's pretty unrealistic. But what would it take? Where on the roster do you need to see somebody, a dark horse, explode and become a guy that can tip the balance for Penn State?
So I already talked about it before, but the receivers, I'm even with Cephas, who I think is a really good player and is a big-time player. That's a guy, that's a position that I'm still looking at and kind of with a question mark right now. And hopefully Cephas can be that guy. Keandre Lambert-Smith is a guy I like. And obviously they got some freshmen that I'm excited for. Caden Saunders, who we didn't see too much of this past year. I think he could be a really good slot receiver for Penn State, really highly rated recruit. But it's a lot of unknowns right now. And at least Cephas, was really good, but also is at Kent State, where it's not the best competition. So making the transition, whether or not it could be that alpha number 1 receiver that Penn State's had recently in Juwan Johnson, and then Parker Washington, obviously, Chris Godwin a while back too. But it's like, can you get that number 1 receiver, or will Drew Aller really need to be stepping up? So that's a spot. And then on the defensive side of the ball too, I mentioned, bringing back Chop and Kalen King, who I think both are among the top 3 returning players at their position. I would still say after that, though, Abdul Carter, top 10 linebacker in the country, in my opinion. But then Curtis Jacobs coming back is huge. But a guy that I can't wait to see hopefully develop, Johnny Dixon, I think is a really underrated corner. I think he's a guy that, could step up without Joey Porter Jr. there alongside Kalen King. But obviously you lose Jair Brown. So the safeties I'm a little concerned about next year as well. So the defense I think will be okay. I love Manny Diaz. I mean, that hire, getting him as defensive coordinator, was unbelievable after he was a Miami football head coach. Like, that's just, you see Alabama get those kind of hires, not really Penn State. So getting him was crazy. So I love that he stayed too, which is awesome. But some defense I'm not too worried about. Really, really, I think the X factor for this team is obviously Drew Aller. Everyone's going to be talking about the quarterback. Yeah. But I think what goes into that too is I think that the receiving room has to be the biggest X factor. And I think the O-line too is definitely a question mark. Olu Fashano's a stud, but other than that, there are the other 4 some question marks on the offensive line besides Olu Fashanu.
Young talent that can develop and some very talented players based on their recruiting, but you're right. A prove-it area would definitely be especially probably everything right of Fashanu. I think you make a good point there. Oh, my gosh. So many things I want to talk to you about. This is the BWI Daily Edition. I'm Thomas Frank Carr. That's Max Chadwick. He is the PFF college analyst. You can check him out, pff.com. You wrote the top 10 returning players in college football at each position. We mentioned some of the guys that you had on those lists: Kalen King, Olu Fashanu, Chop Robinson, and Abdul Carter. Not on the list, and this is I'm interested. I'm not surprised he's not, but Theo Johnson. You touched on him a little bit earlier. Doing some digging in the PFF data, when he was healthy, second half of the season onward, and the way that Mike Yurcich used him over the middle of the field, he had the highest average depth of target of any tight end in America. He had the highest yards per catch, and he was one of the most productive, explosive players in the nation. If he's healthy next year, given his improvement in the run game, watching the way he was able to perform in the Rose Bowl and kind of the end of the season, is he a guy you could project as a potential first-round conversation next year and a guy that would be on your list with a full season of health and that production?
Yeah, he's a guy. First round, I think, is a little rich only because tight end is so hard to get first round. Like Brock Bowers, I think, is guaranteed, but after him, it's going to be tough, for anyone else. But Theo Johnson's a guy, I mean, we all know, like, he was a highly, highly rated recruit. When Penn State got him, I thought he was going to come in and be Pat Fryermuth immediately, where he was like this dominant freshman. And it hasn't really been that because Brenton Strange has been really good. But another stat that I love for Theo Johnson, his passer rating when targeted is 158.3. That is a perfect passer rating. So that is obviously the highest in the country for tight ends, or truly for anyone in college football, because you can't get better than that. So whenever he was on the field and whenever he was targeted, he made something happen, basically. So I think he's a guy, obviously was Strange in the NFL draft now. I think he's a guy that Drew Aller should be looking at constantly. And we mentioned the pass catchers, and we mentioned, the receiver, wide receiver specifically, the question mark there. Truly, Theo Johnson could take over and be the alpha. And you don't see that too often with a tight end, but he's a guy that I was so impressed by it. He caught 20 of his 24 targets for over 300 yards and 4 touchdowns. He forced 3 missed tackles. 9 of those catches went for 15 plus yards too. So that 158.3 passer rating to me is an eye-opening stat, and obviously limited opportunities, but at the same time, now as the number one tight end in that room, and as the high 4-star recruit that he was coming out, I am finally excited to see what he can do in this offense. And I think Drew Aller should be one of his best friends from day one.
Okay, so now let's see if you and I are going to be best friends. I'm going to give you a list of pass rushers, and you tell me who had the better season. Arnold Ebiketie,
okay,
Yetur Gross-Matos, Odafe Owe, Chop Robinson. Who are the guy? Who's the guy that stood out in terms of their best season, their peak season, from what you've seen from Penn State pass rushers?
I will say, only because he didn't have as many snaps as I wanted him to get, but I will say, in terms of just best season, regardless of age, I think it's Ebiketie. I think Ebiketie's 1 year at Penn State was so unbelievably dominant, and I think that to me was like, and people knew, Chop is kind of a guy that nobody really knows of yet. I always thought Yetur was a little overrated at Penn State, and he hasn't lived up to it in the NFL either. Odafe Owe is a freak athlete, and he's been pretty good for the Ravens so far. But I would say Ebiketie 1, and then I put Chop 2. And Chop's grade, I think, is better than Ebiketie, but like I said, it's just because he played 455 snaps, which is good, which is a lot of snaps. Yeah. It's not, what Ebiketie was doing game in and game out. So Chop is, I'm excited for him to hopefully get a full-time role, but yeah, that one Ebiketie season was special. But if you're adjusting for age, I would maybe say that Chop was more impressive only because he's a true sophomore doing that, where Ebiketie, I believe, was either a senior or a redshirt senior, because I know he transferred in from Temple. So, adjusting for age, Chop more impressive, but just in purely who had the better season, I would say Ebiketie.
Stop stealing my takes. Just stop it. Just stop it. No, we agree. There you go. Doesn't make for great podcasting, but I agree with that. I think the part that the sacks and some of the other metrics that Ebiketie was a little bit better at than Robinson. Plus, Nick Tarburton, as you mentioned, was the starter and they rotated in. But Robinson, the amount of times he got by a tackle with an immediate win, those elite pass rushing moves. And the ball just came out of his hand. I think fans especially didn't recognize those things and don't notice those things. But when you watch the film, he was unblockable at times. So, I'm a huge fan of Chop Robinson. I think he can be the best pass rusher that Penn State has had among that group. Micah Parsons, notwithstanding, seeing as he wasn't a defensive end at Penn State. So that's the caveat there. Let's get into the draft stuff, why we brought you on here today to talk about some of these players. You mentioned Joey Porter Jr. You say he's a first-round pick. You think he's a late first-round pick. So give me a little the reason why you think that and maybe some of the areas you think where he could go.
I mean, he's just a lockdown man corner who's a ball hawk too. I believe in that Purdue game, he had, I don't want to get the number wrong. I think it was like 6 forced completions or something like that, or maybe even 9. It was one of those two.
I believe it was 9.
That set the record for us for a single game for a Power 5 corner, I believe. So that just tells you everything to know. If you want to turn on that game, I think he went against Charlie Jones a good amount in that game too. Joey Porter Jr. is that lockdown man corner. The one thing, though, that I think he did a little bit better job this year, but in past years has been an issue for him is the penalties. And he gets really grabby. And that's why I think Kalen King is a better overall corner, is because I think Kalen King is basically that good in man coverage like he was. Doesn't have the length that Joey Porter Jr. has, which I think is a terrific aspect of him as a prospect. But I think Kalen King's a little bit better at not being too grabby and still being a lockdown corner. So, Joey Porter Jr., the tools are all there. Obviously, he's got the pedigree of being the son of Joey Porter Sr., who was an unbelievable pass rusher for the Steelers back in the day. And it's actually Steelers my favorite football team. And I remember being a kid watching Joey Porter and now seeing his son is like, wow, I'm getting up there a little bit in age. But Joey Porter Jr. is a guy I like a lot. I don't know that I've seen some top 15 stuff. I don't think I would do that high, but late first round, I would definitely consider him and at least early second round too. So I'm a big fan of his. He's got to get a little less grabby, but he's got all the tools that you could want.
So let me ask you about the tools. Speed is an area that obviously there is not a problem, but if he runs at the combine, what is the ballpark in your mind, having watched him play for as long as you have? Is that something that is part of what might hold him back, or is it purely just his play? And I'll get to the second part of that, but like the speed question, do you think he's going to be a guy that whenever he runs his 40, you go, oh, wow, or, ooh, oh, I didn't think that.
Yeah, that's a guy. So he's a bigger corner, 6'2", and I would say that's his biggest question mark. At least is that he's not the fastest, and I think at the combine he'll probably run in the 4.5s if I had to say, which is not bad, especially when you're 6'2" and 200 pounds like he is. But it's definitely like his recovery speed, which is kind of alarming because he's going to be a press corner, and if he gets beat off the line, it's going to be tough for him to make up that speed. So that's why that's probably the biggest reason why I'm not as high on him. But the speed I think is okay, but I think it's below average, and I think he'll run in the 4.5s if I had to predict.
So the next part of it, and not to totally break him down, given that we're talking about as a first-round pick, but you mentioned press man corner a couple of times. I wrote an article at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com about some of the best fits in the first round. They're all, man coverage teams, or I wanted to throw in a couple match 4 teams, against vertical routes where you're basically running man coverage, but you're in a zone. But the 49ers, they're running cover 3 now. So what do you think about him in zone coverage? And is that something where it's going to limit the number of opportunities, or is he good enough overall that you think he could go into any system, or is it very specific to you?
I would say it's tough because NFL teams are all running mostly zone coverage. It's actually like the teams that run man the most are still only running it like 40% of the time or something like that. So everyone's running zone more than usual. So that might be another reason why he gets pushed down a little bit. But I think he's okay in zone coverage. I think he's personally that the best thing is for him is as a press man corner. But we've seen him play zone before, and I think it's okay. I just think he's a press corner, and you can play press zone coverage too. Like that's not it's not just press man. So I think he's a press corner for sure. But I don't know. I just don't know if I think he fits a man scheme better. So a team like the Steelers at 17, which would be awesome to see Joey Porter Sr.'s son play for the same team that he was a legend for. That'd be pretty cool. The Steelers need a cornerback too. They run a good amount of press coverage, I know. So yeah, Joey Porter Jr. maybe at 17 could be a good fit. It's a little higher than maybe I would take him, but that's a team that I could see falling in love just because of obviously the ties to his father, and then also kind of what they need and how he fits that.
Yeah, and they have a lot of good number twos. Levi Wallace, Cam Sutton. They have a lot of guys that are good, reliable players, but they don't have a guy that has the elite measurables or elite skills like we're talking about with Joey Porter Jr. Tig Brown, to me, he's fascinating. I can't peg him as a football player, first off, because, again, the speed conversation, I don't know how fast he is. I just know he always gets the football. He's a really good football player. And the way you mentioned Manny Diaz and how fun his defense is, I went back and I watched where he played. Tig Brown played everywhere. So the value of that, what's the value of that? And then all of the good football juju he has, does it matter if he doesn't test length, all those things to the standard that teams want in a safety?
Yeah, he's a good athlete. I'm a big fan of Jair Brown. I think he's terrific. I think he's a guy that is a really good ball hawk too. He's a really good hitter. He's just a really overall a great safety. The thing about him though is that you got to rein him in a little bit, because sometimes he takes too many risks trying to get an interception or trying to make a big hit, and it's just, you want him as a box safety. You want him, his mentality, I think, is his biggest asset, honestly, because I love the mentality he has. But yeah, he tends to kind of come in hot a little too much, and you kind of want to rein him in a little bit. So I think he's a guy that, third round maybe could be in the NFL draft. I think he could be a third round safety, day 2 pick. So yeah, he's great athlete, really good hitter, and great ball hawk, which seems to be everything you'd want in safety. The only thing is, honestly, is something that's very fixable, at least, and that you got to rein him in a little bit. But I think he's worth a shot in day 2.
Does his length, do you think that would scare teams away? Because he's stocky, he's built, but comparing him to Jaquan Brisker, who was 6'1", super long arms, had that more classic safety build. What would it take, I guess, considering all those things, for him to be a top 64 pick?
Yeah, it's definitely an issue, because he's 5'11", and when you talk about him, I want him as a box safety, because you mentioned he's 208 pounds. I don't want him playing deep, because I think he takes too many risks to play deep. But I want him playing downhill, because I think that's where he is at the best. So, but as a box safety at 5'11", that is tough when you're up there with the middle linebackers taking out blocks and stuff like that too. I think he's got the athleticism to thrive as a box safety. But yeah, I think the length is that's a good point by you. I think it's another question mark for sure for him.
Let's move on to Brenton Strange. Go through some of these guys a little bit more quickly. I'm most fascinated, given the guys we just talked about and some of the guys we'll get to. I'm most fascinated this coming week by Brenton Strange at the Combine, because I think if he could test really well, he could be the next Penn State player that goes to the Combine and raises some eyebrows. Do you agree with that? And then what's the range of outcomes for him if that does happen?
Yeah, I think he's an athletic tight end. I think the Combine is built for a guy like Brenton Strange. I think he's going to test well. And we've seen, Penn State's strength and conditioning department is among the best in college football. Like every single year, it seems like, obviously Odafe, Mike Gesicki, Saquon Barkley, who came in, you see Saquon, the freak athlete now. You don't remember, Saquon Barkley came in as a scrawny running back in high school. And now he's just this built tank. And that has a lot to do with the strength and conditioning. And Odafe, runs a 4.3, which is ridiculous. Micah Parsons, another guy too, who came in, honestly, as a freak athlete. But still, Brenton Strange is another one of those products. And, sometimes I have questions with Penn State as coaching up some players, but the strength and conditioning in terms of getting them ready for not only Saturdays, but Sundays is among the best in college football. So I think Brenton Strange is a really underrated tight end prospect. I thought he was really good for Penn State this year. Athletic tight end, like we said. And I'm excited for him at the combine, and I think he could make himself some money next week.
Where does he project best? Given, is he an inline? Is he a wide tight end? Is he an H-back? Is he somewhere in between? Because he's not the biggest guy in the world, but he's not small. So what do you project him in to the NFL, and what do you think he can do for a team?
Yeah, I think he's more of like that slot tight end that you would look for. I don't know if I'd run him too much inline, but I think he's a really good slot tight end. He's not really a great run blocker. So I think I want him more as like, the slot tight end where he's kind of more of a receiver in that aspect. So that's where I personally have him, because I think he's a really good receiver. Just he's not a guy that's going to, dominate people in the run game too much for you. So he's more of a receiving tight end. Where that'll push him, I think he'll probably be a day 3 pick if I had to guess, unless he absolutely blows up the combine. I would guess he'd be like a 4th or 5th round guy right now. But I think Brenton Strange is really good. I think he'll make a team very happy on day 3.
A couple other guys we got to get to, and one guy who is, I think, he's a different player on the Blue White Illustrated message board than he might be over at PFF, and that's PJ Mustafer. By the way, you can sign up for Blue White Illustrated for $29.99, get insider access. We are getting into recruiting season. The dead period is almost over, and that means you need to know who's going to be on campus. $29.99 from now until the start of college football season to get all that information from Sean Fitz, from Ryan Snyder, from Greg Pickle. Nate Bauer doesn't do anything with recruiting, but he does all of the other stuff. So sign up now. And of course, if you're watching this here on YouTube, like the video, subscribe, and if you want to get a question on our weekly mailbag show, one of our favorite segments from our fans, leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, and your question is the comment. We'll get to that next week on the show. PJ Mustafer, let's get to him. What is he to you as an NFL football player? Let's just start there. What is he to you as an NFL football player?
He's big. He's 6'4", 320. Disappointing year this year. I wasn't as pleased with his tape as I wanted. And he's coming off a knee injury, obviously the year before, where I actually thought he had one of his best years yet. He's a guy that I always thought would break out for Penn State and never quite did it. And I think injuries unfortunately played a part for him too. But he's a bigger D tackle at 6'4", 320. And I think he'd be a good, nose tackle-ish, but also can play a little bit in the B gap as well. And I think I like him. I don't know if I'd take him any higher than middle of day 3 probably, and that's just unfortunately because of injuries, I think. But he's a guy that I think you need to turn on his tape before this past season, because I think this past year wasn't very good at all, but you could see the potential he has at least in 2021 and previous years.
Yeah, he was one of the tackles leading the nation in stops for PFF before his knee injury against Iowa last year. So I agree with you fully that the legend of PJ Mustafer for his leadership and what he's able to do in the holistic sense of being a football player was much more than his actual down-to-down performance, because one of my concerns, and again, it goes back to the knee injury, is if you're going to be a one technique in the NFL, you got to take on double teams better than that. And I think he can do that. But one of the things he's been in these defenses with Brent Pry and with Manny Diaz, where it's like whack-a-mole. Where are you going to end up? You're not going to end up in the A gap. You might end up in the B gap. You might have Zane Durant being your nose tackle because he's the guy in the A gap with a double team. So does he have enough tape to prove he can be that guy? And do you think he's done enough in the offseason at the Senior Bowl? And I don't know what he does at the Combine, but how does he prove he is that guy that a team that's looking for that is going to prioritize him and make him a draftable player?
It's certainly going to be tough now, obviously, with everything going on. But in fact, that he doesn't have any more tape you could really show besides the Combine. But hopefully, at the Combine, at his pro day, he could show that he could do more of that. But he's a guy, honestly, I think it just needs to prove it at the league. So, maybe he's not going to be a high draft pick, unfortunately, because of the year he had. But you mentioned the intangibles. That's a good point, because he is a terrific leader, I know. And I know teams will probably fall in love with him in interviews, but I don't see him being more than a day 3 pick, only just because you see the potential, like we mentioned last year, but he got hurt. And then this year when he came back, it just wasn't that good. So it's like, man, it's tough projecting him to the next level for sure.
Yeah. And the value, by the way, the value of a run stuffer, I think, is where we're not projecting him to be an elite pass rusher in the NFL. I think his brother is a great comparison. Sam Mustafer is a really quality center for the Bears. Mm-hmm. And it's not like he's a guy that overwhelms you with physical ability at all times. And I think PJ's a better athlete than his brother. But that DNA proves it can play in the NFL already. It's just the question of, is somebody going to take a risk on him? Do they see more than what's on film? I think that we're in agreement there. Last two guys we'll talk about. Save the best for last. One of my favorites, Parker Washington, Mitchell Tinsley. I think even though they're different sized players, they have the exact same questions coming into the combine. So let's just start with the obvious point. Give me a 40 time that both players need in order to reach their maximum draft potential. And where is that?
Yeah, Parker, I love Parker so much, but I just don't, the combine is he's, I don't know. If he comes out and is a good athlete at the combine, that'll be great for him because I think he's an okay athlete. I think his dominance shows more on the field than it can in the underwear Olympics. But I think that Parker Washington and the combine's not going to be great. I think he'll be fine. Nothing special. He's a bigger slot receiver, 5'10", 215. So a lot like Amari Rodgers, honestly, was coming out of Clemson, where it's like that. So I don't think the combine is gonna be great for him. If he runs like in the 4.4s though, like that'll be great. I think that's a really, really good time for him. And Tinsley, I probably put in that range too. Tinsley, Parker might be a second round pick. Tinsley, probably more of a day 3 pick, if anything. So I would say, 4.4s range. If faster, I think he's a faster receiver than Parker. So maybe if you can crack the low 4.4s, that'd be great. But yeah, for Parker specifically, if he runs in the 4.4s, that'll be a really good time for him, I think.
So with Tinsley, one of the things I'm so interested in is obviously it's Western Kentucky, but he showed the ability to break tackles and make big plays, even against Big Ten teams. When I was scouting him for his transition to Penn State, I thought there was a lot to like there, and it didn't really translate this past season. I'm taking my L's on like the speed and the explosiveness. I don't think he's a deep threat, but if he does run well, and I guess this is really what I'm getting to here, if he does run well, 6'2", he's an exceptional route runner with exceptional short area abilities. His route transitions are some of the best. So does that make him a kind of a sleeper in the draft to you, or is he just what you've seen and that's kind of what he is, and he'll be a reliable, big-bodied guy in the NFL?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned that 6'2", usually 6'2" receivers sometimes are a little clunky out there. He's not. He's a terrific route runner, and I think he's a guy that you could definitely see being a better receiver even in the NFL than he was in college. Because I thought Penn State utilized him well, and I know when Parker went down with his injury, and that's another question for me with Parker is how is he doing after the injury?
Great point.
I don't even. Do we have confirmation that he's participating in the combine? I don't even know if that's
last time we saw him, he was in a boot and on a scooter, so that's not a great place to start. Yeah. But no, I don't. I haven't seen anything.
I know something happened with his leg, and hopefully he gets better soon. So maybe he doesn't even participate in the combine. Maybe he only does a pro day, which maybe could boost his times up a little bit with the home score, shot clocks there. But I think that Mitchell Tinsley is definitely a guy that I like, and I definitely, as a Penn State fan, we know more about him than I think any other NFL draft analyst would, because they just haven't watched him that much. And I think he's a guy that, like you said, really good route runner. I like him after the catch a lot. I thought he was awesome at Western Kentucky, a lot like Dante Cephas coming in now, where it was like, this is one of the best receivers in college football at a group of 5 level. So Cephas, I think that's why I'm kind of cautiously optimistic about Cephas, because Tinsley I thought would come in and be, fantastic. And he was good. He was a really good receiver. That's why I'm kind of expecting that from Cephas, because it's kind of like the same kind of thing. So I'm not expecting him to be the alpha number 1. That's why I'm kind of nervous about Penn State's receiver room. But Tinsley I like a lot, and I do think he could be a guy that, you see on day 3, and then all of a sudden he's, a good number 3 or number 4 receiver in the NFL, and you're like, wow, where did that come from? So, yeah, I like Tinsley a lot as kind of a sleeper on day 3.
I know I just said that was going to be the last two players, but I would be derelicting my duty if I didn't bring up a couple more players. I'm going to start with Juice Scruggs, and then we're going to get to the quarterbacks here in a second, and I do mean plural. So do you have a couple more minutes to talk about all that?
Yeah.
Okay. So let's go to Juice Scruggs. From my evaluation standpoint, I am not nearly as good about evaluating interior linemen, especially centers, when it comes to the draft, when it comes to their projection to the next level. But 34-plus inch arms, very good athlete, 315 pounds, performed well last season. What am I missing about Juice Scruggs from, guy you should want in the draft? And what are his shortcomings that I have not noticed?
I think you're right. I think he is a guy that maybe is getting a little underrated in this process right now, and he performed well this last year. I don't think he was dominant, and there are really dominant, like John Michael Schmitz, the Minnesota center, was the best center in college football, in my opinion. Olu Oluwatimi won the Remington Award as the best center in college football, won the Outlet Trophy as the best center in college football. Luke Whippler. So just in the Big Ten alone, there's a lot of really good prospects at center. Yeah. But Juice Scruggs, I mean, look, he's got the awesome name, obviously, and then he's been a really good pass protector this year for Penn State. I think he's a good run blocker, not a great one. So he's got the tools, though, for sure. He's a guy I could see, as an interior offensive lineman. Again, he'll probably be a day 3 pick, but he could still be a starter down the line for a team at either guard or center. I think he has versatility there. So I think Juice Scruggs could be a long-term starter in the NFL, and a guy that another guy teams could be happy with on day 3. I'm just not as high on him, probably. I would say he's more of a day 3 pick for me.
Yeah, but to your point, a long-term starter, especially on the interior, those come from the 5th, 6th round for offensive linemen. So it's not. I wouldn't even say it's a disrespectful to say that about a guy who, has that profile. Mm-hmm. Now I got to get to the quarterbacks. Sean Clifford not invited to the combine. Will Levis, a former Penn State quarterback, might be the number 1 overall pick. I don't like the term take. Because it just what's your take on this? It just becomes like mouth garbage. But what's your take on the Penn State quarterback situation with those two, given the NFL context here?
I'm a little mad at Jimmy Franks for not starting Will Levis, for one. But I love Sean. I actually was very lucky to interview Sean before the Rose Bowl, and that was such a cool conversation. He's the man. And but yeah, Will Levis, man, he is Sean. I don't think is getting drafted. Sean, to me, first of all, Sean doesn't need to play football. Sean is an extremely successful in the NIL world right now. I saw a report that he already made millions of dollars selling off some of his company. So it's like, this dude is fine. Like, we don't need to worry about Sean Clifford. He's going to be very okay. And he seems to be very entrepreneurial. So maybe he wants to go into business, but I could see him being a great coach too, just because he knows that Penn State offense so much. He's been kind of a coach on the field for Penn State. So I think if he wants to play football, XFL, USFL, those leagues are sprouting up. Maybe they give him a shot. I don't think there's much of a shot in the NFL, unfortunately. Levis is an enigma. He is, from my lead draft analyst coworker, Mike Renner, who is he's very high on him. He's got him, I think, as his number 2 quarterback in the draft. Yeah. I'd maybe go either 3 or 4. I debate him and Richardson all the time. He did not look good this year, but just because, it wasn't a pretty picture doesn't mean it was the whole picture. I think that Kentucky's supporting cast was one of the worst in the country. The receiving room was bad. Coaching was bad. Offensive line bad. And then Levis had turf toe. So I think a lot of that had to do with the supporting cast, but it's still like, when you're taking a guy in the top 5 and he had a bad year his last year, it's like, I don't know, man. So and he's old, he's 5th-year senior. He's not like a true junior or anything like that. So it's tough. It's tough for me to say he's going to be a star, but I could see him being a star because he's a bigger quarterback who could run, and he's got a cannon of a right arm. But to me, I would rather take, if you're looking for tools at quarterbacks, I'd probably rather take Anthony Richardson than Will Levis, just because I think the ceiling is higher with Richardson, and I don't think the floors are that much different with them either. So Levis, I think, could be a guy that is a lot better in the NFL than he is in college, just because the supporting cast will probably be better. But I think that situation for him matters a lot, and it does for every quarterback. But for him especially, I think it'll be a big determining factor whether or not he's successful.
For me, the deep ball is like what's going to decide it for a lot of people. I think his decision making is good. I think he plays in the pocket well. He'll hang in there despite being a very athletic quarterback. But depending on what game you turn on or what drive you turn on, his deep ball is either one of the best you've ever seen, or it's like, what the hell were you looking at?
Yep.
And I it's not the same thing, but like when I watched Patrick Mahomes coming out, I'm like, I don't know if this kid's going to be good because I don't think any of this translates to the NFL. I don't know if Will Levis is going to be any good because I don't know what side of the coin he's going to fall on when it comes to the NFL and that particular part of the game, which is so important to his, going back to his PFF profile. He had an elite passing grade. Just from watching it, a lot of that was probably built on throwing really good deep balls, but he also threw a lot of bad ones. Yep. So where does that land? And if you're an organization, you mentioned he's a fifth-year quarterback, do you believe that's going to improve at this point? Two different coaching systems and all that stuff included.
I think it will. But it's an interesting point. It's like, you mentioned Patrick Mahomes, and I was in the same boat. And Josh Allen, I was in the same boat too. Justin Herbert, I was in the same boat. And I think that's why Mike is so high on this guy, because Mike was low on Mahomes, as everyone was. He was lower on Josh Allen as most people were.
Oh, yeah.
And he was lower on Justin Herbert. And he I've gotten dinner with him a couple times, and I'm just like, man, like, what were you seeing Levis? Kind of like, why is he above Stroud? And he's like, dude, I can't miss again. I can't miss again. And I think a lot of teams are going to be looking at that and saying, we can't mess this up again. We can't do this again. So that's why I think, the tools matter. And I think obviously Bryce Young and CJ Stroud are not as toolsy. I would take them still just because what they are, how good they are. But you look at it and you're like, man, if Levis hits, it's going to be better than Stroud. It's going to be better than Bryce Young probably. If Richardson hits, it's going to be better than all of them. So it's kind of like that's why you see both those. You can see 4 quarterbacks, I think, in the top 10 in this draft, just because teams are seeing the best quarterbacks in the league are some of the toolsiest guys in Mahomes and Allen and Herbert. And it's just like you can't mess it up again. You can't mess it up. Yeah. And I think a lot of teams are going to be scared of that.
So fans of this show know I'm a Bills fan. The reason I got into football was because of my love of the Bills. And if people feel that way about Will Levis because of Josh Allen, you've learned the wrong lesson of Josh Allen. Josh Allen, you mentioned you weren't high on him. I was not either. I literally cried out loud, like a thing came out of me, a pain came out of me when they drafted him. They traded up to draft him.
Right.
And let's remember, because now everyone wants Josh Allen. It's like just like being a Bills fan, to get to this playoff run, you have to pay your due diligence. You have to pay for it with 2 or 3 years of him not being good, learning how to throw differently, and then being good. Will Levis's mechanics are all good. It's all about the mental side of it and the accuracy. He doesn't have to relearn how to throw a football. No. So we're even very smart people are being swayed by what I'm concerned is the wrong lesson, that we're going back to the Jake Locker era of big, fast, strong. Let's draft him in the top 10. And that takes out the football side of it.
Exactly. And I think that is a lesson. I know Mike, obviously Mike is way better at evaluating prospects than I will ever be. But Josh Allen is a guy that he's a cautionary tale, because everyone thinks I can fix him. Kind of like if you're in a bad relationship, you're like, oh, I can fix him. That's kind of the thing where it's like, this only happened one time. This only happened once, where this guy, Josh Allen, after 2 years of Josh Allen, I was probably with you and I was saying, this guy stinks. They got to look at drafting a quarterback again. He's not good. Then all of a sudden he just, burns the world down. And now he's who he is now. So that's a cautionary tale. And I think Mahomes showed elite play in college. It was more of the offense and whether or not that would translate. Allen was bad in college. Herbert was bad in college. But Herbert, I think the offense in Oregon was horrible. I mean, it was like I'm not comparing him and saying the talent's similar, but when Penn State threw screen passes every play with Christian Hackenberg, it's like, dude, what are we doing here? This guy's got a cannon. He's firing screen passes into section Q up there. Why don't we let the arm show off a little bit and throw it deep? So that's kind of what Herbert was in Oregon. And why I think immediately in the NFL he was great, because it was just like, oh, this offense is suited more for me. So Allen was different. Allen was just straight up not good, and then he just became great. Levis, I think, is good. I think he's a guy that the footwork is a mess right now, but I think the turf toe might have played a part in that. So if he fixes the footwork, gets in the NFL system with better supporting cast, I think he could be really good. It's tough when don't have a good last year and you're saying, oh, he's a top 5 pick. That to me is a little questionable. But if you're chasing upside, he's up there. But I might go with Anthony Richardson. If you're truly swinging for the fences, I probably go with Anthony Richardson, even though Levis's floor might be a little higher than Richardson.
I thought we were going to talk for 25 minutes. We went 45. This was awesome. Max Chadwick of PFF joining the BWI Daily Edition. Max, thanks so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. One more guy I just want to throw out there just so I can say, hey, I told you guys so. Okay. Danny Dennis-Sutton, I think, is going to be a superstar. Whenever I turn on the tape and he's awesome, I'm like, wow, he's former 5-star. That's, we talk about all the 5 stars Penn State's brought in with Nicholas Singleton and all that. Danny Dennis-Sutton, and hopefully he's going to be there with Chop Robinson next year and Adisa Isaac. But I know we didn't talk about him, but I wanted to bring him up because I watched him recently and I was like, this guy could be special. So I'm excited for DDS next year.
And that one's for free here on the BWI Daily Edition. PFF.com. Check out Max Chadwick. Of course, you can follow our combine coverage at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. We got you covered on all angles. Max, thanks for joining the show. That'll do it for today on the BWI Daily Edition. As always, make sure you subscribe. And thank you for listening on our podcast versions and on YouTube. We will talk to you tomorrow.